this past week, at just about 64 years old, Sid Eudy, better known to us as Sid Vicious in WCW, Sycho Sid and Sid Justice in WWE, depending on the era, he passed away this past week, right before Raw, or at least that's when the news kind of came out. It was right before Monday Night Raw this past week. And, when it comes to Sid, the first thing that comes to mind in my eyes, I mean, there's a lot of things that you definitely could talk about, but one thing that I think came to mind to a lot of people is the WWE Hall of Fame and how this is yet another name that WWE has dropped the ball on in getting to be inducted while they are still alive. Now, there are people inducted like Eddie Guerrero, which essentially were inducted based on some of those things of passing away and then going off and being inducted following that. But WWE likes to strike while the iron is hot. And the problem with that, like, for example, how Edge has been in the WWE Hall of Fame for over 12 years now, is that there's some names out there that aren't getting any younger. We know John Cena, barring a tragedy. We know Triple H, barring a tragedy. We know a lot of Sting, barring a tragedy. Sting 10 years ago, right, when he got inducted. Barring a tragedy, is still going to be there when induction time is here. But Sid, I mean, he's been retired from wrestling for quite a while. I remember about 10 years ago, there was some talk about him making a comeback. We were just talking off air. If you're not really familiar with his story, his career kind of came right to an end when WCW went out of business due to a grueling leg break during the main event of WCW Sin, which was one of the final WCW pay-per-views. And without that, he very much well could have been a part of the Invasion. He could have came back over to WWE just a few months later when they were purchased by WCW. But that pretty much ended his career. It wasn't until over 15 years later that he somehow came back to do kind of like those retro Raws really quickly. I think he took on Zack Ryder, quickly in a squash, or Dolph Ziggler, if I'm not mistaken.
Heath Slater.
Heath Slater. Just essentially an appearance. But there was some talk that, hey, he might still have, a run left in him, per se. About 10 years ago, as I was saying, I remember hearing those rumors. But either way, regardless of if he was to come back and be in the ring or just call it a career, he's been sitting there ample to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame for quite a while. And they didn't do it. And I think a lot similar to him, because he came from the same kind of time as another person who this happened to, and that was Vader. Yep. Vader was inducted right after he passed away, but not by Vader, obviously, but by his family. And when Sid gets inducted, it will be by the same thing. So here's my question, I guess, to you, Brandon, right? Do we need Lex Luger in the Hall of Fame this year?
I would say yes. I do think I think the Lex Express should be in the Hall of Fame. I think it makes a lot of sense. I would say don't be surprised if Sid's going to be in now. I mean, unfortunately, as you mentioned, Vader, he was inducted after his passing and by his family. It's unfortunate because Sid was only 63. Like I know he's been battling an illness for a bit. I saw some pictures of him, at the, later stages before he passed recently. And, he was just soaking up the time. But I think he knew he didn't have a lot of time because there's a lot of pictures of him with his grandkids. And everything that I've seen, read, and heard about him is Sid was a gentle giant. He was a really good guy from what wrestlers' accounts of him, different personalities accounts of him. So, first, the most important thing is that I think we want to send, our thoughts and prayers out to his family. And I'll remember Sid for, the later part because, the most recent thing I remember is him beating the crap out of Heath Slater. But I also remember all of those great power bombs because there's some great power bomb compilations online. You just go on, just type in Sid Vicious, Sycho Sid. You'll see some great power bombs and he was a two-time WWF champion, two-time WCW champion, I think one-time U.S. champ. the resume's there, and I hope he gets in. And it sucks that he's not here for it.
I mean, the resume is absolutely there, but I would definitely say, and the thing is now, that's one of the annoying things is some of these people who could be headliners are now going to be relegated to not headliners just because they're not there. I mean, let's be fair. Bray Wyatt, when he gets inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, is not going to necessarily be the headliner because of the idea that it's not going to be him speaking. You want somebody there who is going to be presenting themselves, The Undertaker, whoever it be, right? So most likely they're not going to be the headliner. And, I will have to say, and I take some annoyance to this and kind of discredit, I said this before, but last year, when Mike Rotunda and his tag team, the U.S. Express, when they got, inducted into the Hall of Fame, I thought it was really kind of half-hearted as just a way to shoehorn more Bray Wyatt stuff. You know what I mean? And less focus on them. Do I think Mike Rotunda deserves to be in the Hall of Fame? Absolutely. I think he should have gone in the Hall of Fame as IRS as well. And this is where you get kind of weird because do you induct him, which one do you induct him as? Because he's a tag team. Like I remember back in the day when they inducted the NWO as a whole and then they inducted Hulk Hogan. It's a little bit different. And I probably think that the IRS himself should have probably been inducted individually first, and then the tag team afterwards, similar to how they do that, right? You do the faction later. You do Ric Flair first, the Four Horsemen second. But, it stinks because now he'll probably be inducted in this year's class. And that is good, but it's also the fact that let's not forget why we have to induct him in this year's class because we missed the boat while he was alive. Let's make sure we are hitting the Lex Lugers. Let's make sure we're hitting I believe Sergeant Slaughter and stuff is in there and there's a bunch of others, but I know some off the top of my head I can't think of that are waiting. I know Sid was one of them. Sid and Lex Luger are the two that I've been sitting on forever and going, what's the holdup with these guys? I'd even say Kevin Nash is an individual. What's the holdup? What's the holdup on him? Diesel, And speaking of that, and talking about some of the memories of Sid, I would say one positive of Sid is I don't want to say carried because Shawn Michaels was integral, but he was a good part of those leaner years of WWF. 95, 96, early 97, when Shawn was going back and forth from injury, and he wasn't around. And the first ever In Your House in Syracuse, New York, Diesel versus Sid. Everyone talks about Diesel being a pretty weak champion, somebody who definitely didn't carry the company. Hence, those were their weak. 95 was their worst year financially, and he was the champ. But Sid was legit. And having the same guy kind of be in the main event in 95 In Your House that was in the main event of WrestleMania 8 against Hulk Hogan kind of shows that this wasn't just he's a main event in a lean time like Diesel is, but he's a main event in all the eras. And again, in WCW, he was a main eventer. He was somebody who I would put up there a lot like Lex Luger, where he's in the main events, but for some reason – if I was to ask a non-wrestling fan who Bret Hart or Shawn Michaels are, they probably know them, but I don't know how well they know Sid. I don't know how well they know Lex Luger. They somehow seem to, slide under the radar. And again, Lex Luger's another one who's great in WCW and WWE. It's hard to pick where he was better. But they were main eventers. And again, Undertaker versus Sid, WrestleMania 13. That's a main event right there where Sid's coming in as champion of that event. He definitely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame for sure. My question to you, I guess, and I know you didn't know his injury too well. Do you think that he is remembered more from fans from his career or from that injury?
Sadly, probably the injury would be my guess because you could click, you click on it. There's a lot of views over the years since the video was uploaded. We were talking, before the show, how long it took you to get it and how long the video clip actually was. It reminds me, as a football fan, it reminds me of Dak Prescott's his ankle injury. It reminds me of Alex Smith, who played for the Washington Commanders, that type of injury. And it's, unfortunately, that's because of how gruesome it was, and it was on TV where people could see it. I do think that's what he'll be most remembered for, unfortunately. But as someone who loves this business as much as I do, I would tell people go watch some of his go watch like the Powerbomb compilation. Just watch his aura, like the way his eyes were when he walked down the ring, like the presence that he had. 6'9", just a monster. And then you hear the stories that he was like I said earlier. You hear the stories about how he was outside of the ring and outside of the business. It's he knew how to play his character to very well, but it seemed like he was just a good all around dude outside of the ring. So I think people should really dig in on Sid Vicious and just find out more about him if you don't know, because he was a very talented wrestler in a really good era of wrestling.
I will say, if you want to watch something from him that's not that injury, that's also just a quick 30-second clip that's out there that WWE might not be putting, because they're putting a lot of stuff out there. This might be one of the other things they're not putting out there. Before the In Your House in Syracuse, New York, the first ever, where he main evented against Diesel, it was on the Free For All show that he had interviewed with Jim Ross. And while he was being interviewed and talking about what he was going to do with Diesel later in the night, he paused and he said, let's do that again. And that's when Jim Ross had that famous line that lives on with Jim Ross forever. We're live, pal. And he had to kind of pick it up and go, oops, and say it and start over because he thought they were doing a recording. And I think there's even another blooper out there with Sid Justice or Sycho Sid doing a promo where he kind of had to retrack and realize you gotta we're live, we got you. You can't retake, if you will. But interesting. So whatever you're looking for in wrestling, Sid had it. If you're looking for a huge athletic guy that can be a heavyweight, you got it. If you're looking for some comic relief highlights on the internet, you got it. If you're looking for gruesome injury, you got it. If you're looking for somebody, unfortunately, who was under the radar, who was somebody who was a major player in WCW and WWE for a better part of the late 80s and throughout the 90s, but wasn't up there with Hulk Hogan and The Rock and Stone Cold when it comes to notoriety, he's right there. And the best part, I guess, about that for a fan is, or somebody who's becoming a fan or a new fan of wrestling, because there's, a lot of young kids out there, there's a lot to discover. And unlike the stuff with The Rock and The Undertaker and Stone Cold and all those kind of guys, and Sting even, if there's a lot out there to discover that might not be just, talked about a million times over like everything else. So that is a definite positive with Sid, is there's a lot of highlights out there, a lot of things to discover, a lot of things to see that maybe you haven't seen before, and go check them out.